Right, greetings, hello. So welcome to our weekly philosophy club here in the middle of France, in a remote village, very peaceful environment. It's in the heart of Old Gaul, the old Celtic heartland of France, and so as a Druid I feel totally at home here, surrounded by oak groves and peaceful people. But I am worried about the state of the world, so I'm going to be talking about this. We've because of my Institute of Peace Studies and the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, now I'm in touch with a lot of people, and obviously this crisis that's going on, let's talk about the Israel-Palestine Hamas thing. This is a real major, worry, and as we speak, the Israeli army looks like it's about to go and invade again the Gaza Strip, which is the size of Rutland, which is the smallest English county, which is 417 square miles. It's tiny. And Gaza is actually even smaller. I did some computations just to give people an idea of how small Gaza is. So the tiniest county in England, which is so small you could drive through it in like 20 minutes. And in that, there are 3 million people crammed in very difficult circumstances. It seems, you would have thought that they could have worked out, the Israelis and Palestinians, a solution to this a long time ago, and have people living in, with all their human rights, with their needs, and get the economy going and so on. A few years ago, Trump and Netanyahu agreed a document drawn up by Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, which, although it was rejected by the Arab world and the Palestinians, I read it carefully and I thought, it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. They could start a discussion with this document and then get something better from it. So I actually wrote a commentary on it. I'm just the commentator. And I said, no, this bit isn't any good, this paragraph I have to go, this needs totally rewriting. So I did a commentary as if I'd been invited to be in the room. And I still think it's better than what we've got, which is potential nightmare for the Palestinians in Gaza. Because Israel is keeping up this ruthless bombardment. And already I think 700 children have died in Gaza. It's a figure I've read. Over, 2,000 people have been just killed by bombardment. Now, the justification for this from the Israeli government is, yes, but we're going after the people of Gaza who did this cruel attack on us, which was a senseless and ruthless slaughter. They killed, I think about 1,000 people in Israel died as well. I know 200 people were slaughtered in this camp for youngsters. They were having like a rave music club type thing. And I know some people that knew people that were there, one of whom was being taken hostage. It's shocking because the people that were doing that rave dance thing were doing it probably just a few kilometres away from the Gaza Strip in an act of solidarity, because most of those youngsters are supportive of Palestinian rights. So they were doing it like a way of saying, hey, we love you, let's make some music. And yet, tragically, of course, the Hamas-led commandos managed to escape out of tunnels and then killed 200 of these youngsters. So what do you do? What can I say philosophically about this? Obviously some healing is needed. And what I've said all along is philosophers are healers, we're doctors. Pythagoras invented the term philosophy to mean someone that heals. How can we heal this kind of stuff? It's so deep. We have at play what are called the if you want, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, to use Jung's terminology. The Hamas people are quite extreme types of Muslims. It's a small cadre, it's not the mainstream Palestinian thought. It's a deviant group, actually, who developed during the 80s and 90s. And I've just read a book on the history of Hamas. And the irony, as I've said in a document I've written, is that initially the Palestinian Liberation Organization was the official government in exile of Palestine under Yasser Arafat, and they wanted to negotiate peace. They wanted a two-state solution, and several times they nearly got it. And for different reasons, either Israel or Palestine refused at the last minute. It's all about recognition and non-recognition. Israel insists that if there's a peace treaty, Palestinians have to recognise their right to exist. I mean, what? I mean, of course they exist, you know. But it shows the level of anxiety in Israel's mind if they insist you have to recognise our right to exist. Why are they saying that? Well, because Hamas has a governing document that says that Israel will be wiped out, and in very belligerent language, that Israel has no right to exist, that all the Jews will be made to forced back into the sea, is the very colourful language. And Hamas is coming from a place of kind of self-validating, self-worth, self-esteem, aggrandizement, you'd say if this was a patient, that the sad reality of life in Palestine is such that they have to big up their self-image into being like superheroes who are going to push the Israelis back in the sea. When I was in Israel and Palestine interviewing people, you know, I said, look, that's not realistic. It's not going to happen. Israel has a huge army and they're very disciplined. There's no way that, all the Arab nations surrounding Israel tried once to do that and failed. Every war Israel has fought, it's won. But the thing is, I want a peace solution here. Israel's very good at fighting wars, but it's not very good at building the peace. It did already invade Gaza. This is the irony of the situation. You know, over 10 years ago, it did this. It launched an invasion. It conquered Gaza. It destroyed loads of tunnels. And it tried to go after... it wasn't Hamas in charge then. It was the Palestinian Liberation Organization. But the Israelis made an absolutely fatal mistake. They supported the rise of Hamas in order to delegitimize the PLO, who they really feared. And it's like making a friend of your enemy's enemy. So what happened was the PLO and Hamas then fought a horrible series of conflicts, civil wars, but Hamas won. So Israel's looking there thinking, oh my God, the people we backed, they've turned out to be even worse than the other guys. So how do you repair that? I don't think the answer is going in and mass slaughtering loads more people in Gaza. It doesn't do Israel's public image any good, although they say they don't care. It certainly reinforces their idea as a sort of conquering nation of militaristic people. I don't think it has the support of the religious Jews, and I've listened to some of the most fervent, pious Jews, Kabbalist types like me, who are saying this isn't God's will. God never in the Bible gives permission to go in and conquer and slaughter and take over other territories. You've got to fight with a certain degree of, civilization and according to certain values and rules. And as a member of the United Nations, Israel is pledged to do that. I've suggested a solution in my call. I've issued a declaration, which is that the guy that was responsible for this massacre, who's a man called Mohammed Daif, who was a student at the Gaza University, ironically, he was really fond of theatre and he was a comedian, as well as he studied chemistry, biology and physics and learned how to make bombs. And he's become the head of the military wing of Hamas. Well, I think that guy, and if you ever listen to this talk, I think that guy should simply go and surrender himself to the UN for trial in the International Court of Justice, because he's committed and he's colluded in the committing of war crimes, absolutely. And he's the guy that Israel wants, and maybe the little cadre around him. Now this guy, if he was to surrender, to a neutral third party, like, I don't know, the Norwegian peacekeepers in Gaza or something, who could take him to Holland, to The Hague, and he could face trial. Now, I think that would be a much more healing thing to do for the world, because in his defence, and I'm sure he'd get top lawyers pledging to support him, he could argue, yes, they did a terrible thing, they did a criminal thing, but Israel's been doing it for decades, and Israel has done this and this and this. And it would all come out in the trial. Israel, of course, would defend itself and say, yeah, but, you know, they did that and they did that. And also, I don't think in international law, I may be wrong, The Hague would decide this. His defence would be, yes, I organised this mass slaughter of 1,000 Israelis, but they've been slaughtering my people for a long time. You know, I'm not sure that's a defence in law. But that depends, because actually, so far as I'm aware, the guy's not an Israeli citizen. He's a Palestinian citizen, but Palestine isn't recognised by the international UN system. So it would put everything into a really interesting fine-tooth analysis, and if that trial happened, world opinion would take different sides, you know, and it would be a very, it's time we had that trial. That's what justice is for. We need to hear the debates. What Israel is probably going to do is just bomb and you know, try and suppress and silence these voices and just kill them all, which is not the way to get a healing. It's not a way to get a therapy. That will just breed up a whole new generation of Muhammad Daifs who will try and get back at them. Ad infinitum. I would say let's try and give wisdom a go. I mean, as a philosopher, I do think philosophy can help heal more than just pure violence and militarism. So I want to also just say about philosophy that Karl Marx and other 19th century intellectuals said that all philosophy starts with biblical criticism in Europe, because the Bible, certainly in large part, doesn't give a very clear moral lead to human beings. It's full of violence, it's full of rape, it's full of cruelty. And if we, and this was the problem with, you know, a lot of European history, where religion didn't solve the problems of wars and conflict. So in the 19th century, people said, let's study the Bible critically and see if we can, like, think in new categories. And so one chap who's doing this, a guy called Steve Wells, American biblical studies guy, has gone through the entire Bible and made a note of every time somebody is killed by order of God. And God kills, and there's a table at the back of the book, it's called Drunk with Blood, God's Killings in the Bible by Steve Wells. It's an extraordinary book, and everyone that reads the Bible and loves it should read this book, because the God of the Bible is actually pretty cruel. In 1 and 2 Chronicles, 5:18 to 22, well, just another holy war, 50,000 people die. In 2 Chronicles 13, 17 to 18, well, 500,000 die. Actually, they're Israeli soldiers, but God was angry with them. In 2 Chronicles 14, 9 to 14, 1 million Ethiopians die. Now, these are figures in the actual Bible. This is what the God of the Bible is up to, doing an awful lot of killing. And in fact, the total amount that is calculated is somewhere about 25 million. That's sort of estimating, because there are many passages where it says, you know, millions are slaughtered. It was as many as flies on a hot summer day in the locust season, and it doesn't give a number. So Steve Wells has kind of estimated. But the actual number of definite killings is 2,821,000. Now, my concern is that the, you know, the people behind this tragedy in the Gaza, Hamas-Israel war, are reading these old scriptures, and it sort of gives them the idea that this has got God's sanction, that it's fine to go killing people because, look, hey, the Bible says it's okay, and we've got God on our side. And the trouble is the Muslim people have been reading their Quran, of which this is a brilliant version, and again, there are many passages where Allah, which is the Arabic word for God, sanctions killing. I have to say far fewer than as far as I can work out in the Hebrew Bible. And nobody's done the drunk with blood analysis of the Quran. It'd be very interesting to count up the number of killings. I think it's less. But nevertheless, they're sanctioned and the idea is the same. Interesting enough, in the New Testament, the total number of killings is only 4. And one of those is Jesus Christ. So all the other, nearly 3 million, are in the earlier part of the Bible. Why is that? Well, I think what was going on in Jesus' mind is that it's time to stop the killings. That God doesn't actually want us to kill each other. And, you know, I agree with him. I think that, and I have many friends in Palestine who are Christian. I think what's always forgotten by analysts is that Palestinians are Christians as well as Muslims and secular thinkers. So in Gaza there will be Christian kids under those bombardments, which is, you know, like ridiculous. Although I will say that the weaponized version of Israeliness, the Israeli state, is some of its more extreme elements have real problems with Christians. And there have been some legal cases in Jerusalem recently of Israelis spitting at Christians on their just pilgrims going around, but they're obviously wearing Christian garb. And these Israelis are spitting at them deliberately and, you know, maliciously. And actually 3 of them have been arrested by the Israeli state, whose official thing is to be neutral. You know, all religions are welcome in Israel, as long as you behave. And spitting at people of other religion is a hate crime. So it's right that they should be prosecuted. Of course, Arabs also spit at Jews. I think there are cases in the West Bank where Israeli soldiers and stuff have been spat at by Muslim passers-by, Palestinians, whatever. What I'm saying, I think this is what Jesus surely would have been saying, is like, it's time to stop the killing, time to stop the spitting, and time to stop the hate speech. Because the more we go on doing that, the more kind of massacres there are going to be, the more people then think that it's good to fight back and kill. I don't think killing is the solution. And because I'm a philosopher who happens to believe, like Plato, in the soul, I believe in the soul is here embodied for learning experiences over different lifetimes, like Buddha said. I don't think it helps to go around killing people. I think it's much better to try and pursue the path of wisdom. And just the other day we had a saint in the church who's called Saint Philip the Evangelist, who used to go to Gaza. It's interesting reading about his life story. You know, there were Christians in ancient early Gaza, including St. Philip, and there were philosophers, and it has a rich history. I'd like to see Gaza rebuilt, restored. I'd like to see a permanent peace treaty signed between Israel and all of Palestine, Hamas included, and Iran, which would have to co-sponsor that because Iran is a supporter of the Islamic groups in Palestine and Gaza. But since I'm now a research fellow at an Islamic university in Iran, I can certainly say that I think most Iranians really want peace in this region. It's said that, Iran's behind all the terrorism, but no, they're not. Most Iranians are very wise, peace-loving people who've read their Quran deeply and realise it's a peace document, as I've said in my commentary on it. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Israel-Palestine war. And I just dread to think that tomorrow, Monday, might be the beginning of this ground invasion. I hope not. I know that Gutierrez, the Secretary General of the UN, is saying, no, don't do this, it's ridiculous. Let's get a peace solution. Iran is saying, don't do the ground invasion or we might have to interfere. Recently said, just today I think, by one of their ministers in the UN. So we're teetering on an edge, and all I can say is that let's turn to philosophical work as a planet and give up the saber rattling, swords and violence. And the same goes to Putin. I've opposed Putin's invasion of Ukraine, because it was totally unnecessary. We could have worked out a solution to I've always thought a dual citizenship for the people of Ukraine. If they want to be Russian and Ukrainian, fine, that would have worked. Much better than all this ridiculous slaughter. And Putin called for a ceasefire, but at the same time, he's not ceasefiring in his war in Ukraine. He's been increasing his attacks. So that's hypocrisy. And although the Russian minister to the UN speaks very intelligently and wisely about the need for balance and moderation and mediation and all that stuff, they're not, it's double standards, because they're not saying the same about Ukraine. So I say total ceasefire in Israel, Palestine, total ceasefire in Ukraine and Russia, mediation teams go in, European Union mediation service, go in and solve this with the UN. And we actually pay the European Union, the people of Israel, Palestine, to not fight. Likewise, the people of Ukraine and Russia. You see, economically, it's a much better investment for Europe to have peaceful neighbours in our part of the world than all this mass slaughter which causes mental illness rates, suicide, refugees, you name it. If you're on the side of humanity, which we are here, we have to be on the side of peace. Okay, that's all I want to say to start this session of the club. Any questions or comments anyone wants to make before we go on?
So, tomorrow something's going to happen, you say?
Well, I hope not, but the Israeli army is rumbling its tanks just near the border with Gaza, which is this small strip of land. And they haven't gone in yet. They're working out if you take the view that, let's say you're an Israeli general and you've made a decision politically, your government's decided to go in and take out Hamas. It's a huge security military dilemma, because there are thousands of Hamas fighters and they have tunnels crisscrossing all underneath heavily populated areas, and they will be firing back at you. My idea of a self-surrender would solve this if they surrender the lead guy, but probably that would be against Islamic custom. He's there, but if they surrender that top guy and his aides, then I think the Israeli army wouldn't go and invade. But the chances of them doing that are quite small, and I think they've been working out their plans. Which sectors they're going to try and capture first and all that. I'm not sure they'll be ready by tomorrow, because for one thing they asked the people of northern Gaza to all go to the south, over 1 million people, but they've nowhere to go and live in the south, and it's a very harsh thing to demand, and they said you've got 24 hours to leave. So they're trying to create a sort of climate of fear before they invade. So I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I pray it's not going to happen. But because that'll be quite serious, and especially with Iran saying today that they would interfere. It's a more general war would break out in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments, Swan?
Yeah, that's the point. I think society or humanity now is on a very stupid stage of consciousness, because more violence will bring more violence, and it will not solve anything, as it had not solved anything in the past. Just more violence. So I don't know why governments and politicians and warlords in the world think they will solve anything by making more violence against Palestine or Palestine against Israel. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Always in history, it's what always make a solution to conflicts was union, like European Union or the reunification, or I don't know, Italy or the United States or so. That's the only thing that ended wars, union, and never more violence. More violence creates more karma in the form of violence, and more violence and more violence, and it's not gonna end never until they reach the point of union with each other as a society or country, or I don't know, spiritually or religiously or whatever. But so how long it's gonna take to get to that union, who knows, and how much casualties and deaths and wars it's gonna take, who knows. But
well, we should be there by now. I would have thought we've had enough deaths, you know.
Yeah, me too, but
and I would have thought the people of Israel had the Holocaust done to them in Europe. They've suffered enormously. So have the Palestinians, you know. I would have thought they would be happy to negotiate now. But you see, this chap, Mohammed Dev, is very young. These are youngsters and they've been brainwashed to think that Israel is evil. And there's a lot of evidence, you know. Israel's done some terrible things in the history of Hamas that I've been listening to. You know, both sides have committed what we would call war crimes. There's no doubt about that.
Someone has to be the grown up, the adult, you know. If it's this Mohammed Day, if it's a youngster, a brainwashed youngster, well, at least Israel should say they are kids as well. Like that's the point. It's like we are using humanity are using violence like a kid that has to fall and fall and fall again until he realizes why he's falling and
Sure.
avoid it. So
no, it's a question of growing up, maturation.
Yeah.
When I was a kid at school,
Yeah.
I'll just share a story. When I was in my grammar school in Brighton, I had a friend, right, who sat next to me at the desk, and we would play this game. I would pinch him. He would pinch me back. Then I pinched him back. And then a couple of minutes later, he'd pinch me back.
Yeah, it escalated.
And then I'd poke him, and he'd poke me back. And this would go on for a whole lesson, like 60 minutes, right? And nobody would back down. Eventually, the guy that started it backed down, right? And we did this day after day for like, and that's what kids do. I was like 11, right? And it seems to me that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
Now it's a foolish game. I grew out of that eventually, and actually concentrated on the lesson, you know. But that's what I think we've got to do as humans. We've got to grow out of that pinching game.
Yeah.
And concentrate on the real reason we're here on this planet, which is to learn wisdom, I think.
Yeah.
And you know. Okay, so look, let's go on then. Since we're here to learn wisdom, let's move to our second part of the Philosophy Club. If you want to shuffle those up and choose a tarot, we're going to be looking at the tarot of the gods.
Cool.
And we're going to see what light the divine intelligence can shine on this. Okay.
Jupiter.
Okay, that's great. Stick him down there. And then if you want to shuffle up and then you choose one yourself.
Eros, Queen of Water.
Okay. Right, so these are two archetypal deities. They're both very important. Jupiter is the king of the gods. He's also Zeus in the tarot. And he is the equivalent of the card of the emperor in traditional tarots. Right. Now, the emperor stands for power. And one thing that I would just comment on this Israel-Palestine thing is that all these countries were part of the British Mandate in Palestine. The real imperial power here was Britain, which replaced the Ottoman Empire after World War One. And when I studied World War One history in depth, you learn about that terrible war, the sacrifices made and all the rest of it. This is why I think Britain has a responsibility to help heal this conflict. It's why I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. I don't think Britain is fulfilling its karmic mandate with history by not mediating and solving this conflict. There are many people in Britain that are pro-Palestinian, many are pro-Israeli. The government should be kind of neutral, use its power, it's a member of the Security Council, to work out a long-term solution. The Americans have failed. America doesn't have, I'm sorry to say this, the political intelligence, because it has a very combative political system itself, Democrats versus Republicans. It's not a very helpful mechanism for solving conflict overseas. Again, it's very good at winning wars, but it doesn't know how to build peace. I still think Britain could, and maybe through the Commonwealth, because Britain is the mothership of the Commonwealth. King Charles III is now the head of the Commonwealth. I think a Commonwealth delegation, including people from 53 Commonwealth countries, Canada, India, Pakistan, all the rest of it, could try and talk sense into these parties. And we want Israel to have an independent, happy state living in security and not being bombed. The problem the Israelis are facing is that Hamas have been chucking rockets at them for the last 10 years and killing people. That would all have to stop. And likewise, aid, support would have to go to Palestine. Along the lines of the Trump-Kushner report with Netanyahu, if you actually read it, it suggests like a port. It gives them an airport near Jerusalem. It gives them trade and all kinds of things. It gives them a bridge connecting, a railway probably, between the West Bank and Gaza. All kinds of goodies. It's about economic empowerment for Palestine. Why can't Britain, as the imperial power, actually deliver on that? Tony Blair was supposed to do this when he was leading the quartet of powers, including Russia, America, EU, and Britain, and he did absolutely nothing. He took a salary, I believe, after he stepped down as Prime Minister. He did absolutely nothing. I think his credibility wasn't very good because he led the unjust invasion of Iraq in 2003. But we need to get someone who could actually do that job. So that's my first response about the imperial dimension of this. Look at it from Jupiter's perspective. You're the king of the gods, right? It's partly his fault because when the Romans invaded this land, that was the real imperial power back in the day. There was a huge clash between them and the Jewish people. And the Romans went so far as to insist that the temple in Jerusalem should be renamed the Temple of Jupiter. And they put statues of Jupiter. Now that didn't go down well with the pious Jews, for whom you can't have a statue of God. God lives in your own sense of justice and truth. So there was a cultural clash. That all needs